Madam President, today I want to talk for a few minutes about the discussion we're having about whether to have a discussion or not, the debate we're having about whether to have a debate or not. It is always amazing to me how far we've moved in such a short period of time from the way the Congress always did its work. You know, the way you set your priorities, both at home and in the government, is how you spend your money. And you might think that's not the way you set your priorities, but if you think something's really important to you and your family and you find out you're not investing any money or time, either one, in it, it's probably not all that important. It's just probably something you've decided is a good thing to say is really important. This is the process we go through in the government to talk about what our priorities are and what could be more significant in our priorities than the bill that I'd like to see us take up today, the military construction and VA affairs bill, the bill that determines lots of things about not only people who serve in the military, but what's available for their families, what kind of support structure is there, and then of course with the Veterans Administration, what's there after you serve? How are we meeting that commitment that we've made to our veterans that if you serve as we are grateful for the government, then is sure that we're always there to do what the American people have told veterans they do if veterans did serve. And, you know, we've already had votes not to go to the defense appropriating bill, a bill that's about the same amount of money the president asked for and what the president said was needed to defend the country. But apparently there is some balance somewhere in the world that I'm not aware of, that no matter how much it costs to defend the country, you have to spend that much money on other things that don't defend the country, that there is a balance between what's happening in Syria today and how many employees the EPA needs or how many employees the IRS needs. That is obviously something that doesn't make sense to people. It doesn't make sense to me. But we couldn't get the 4 additional votes we needed to go to the defense appropriating bill. Now, I guess in a world where the president said that he's also going to veto the defense authorizing bill, not because of what it authorizes, but because of the money that eventually the appropriators would have to spend, people have to wonder what's going on here. I mean, the number one priority of the federal government is to defend the country. And following that priority, our obligation to those who do, those who serve in the military, their families, and that's what the military construction bill would do. And it actually spends a little more money than we spent this year. That appears to be everybody's complaint, that somehow the government is not spending enough money. But the appropriating committee took the amount of money that the law allows, and the Budget Control Act did a good thing in terms of keeping spending under control. That's one of the few things that has happened in Washington, D.C. in a long time that actually did put a lid on spending, because it actually put a lid on spending. It actually says in the law how much money we can spend this year on discretionary spending. And so the appropriating committee, with Republicans in charge for the first time in a long time, did the work for the first time in a long time. In fact, this is the first year in 6 years that the appropriating committee voted all the bills out of committee, marked up all the bills, cut places where the committee thought should be cut, increased places where the committee thought should be increased, and did that all at a level that the law allows. But apparently the law is not good enough for our friends who always want to spend more money. And it's not even good enough to debate the bills that come out at the level of the law, and to let those be amended and to let that work be publicly done. This worked pretty well for a long time, where I think initially, Madam President, there's probably one bill. There's probably one spending bill, but I think in the tradition of the Congress, that was the one bill that in both the House and the Senate, you were able to debate as long as you wanted to until everybody was worn out offering their ideas as how to spend the money better or not spend it at all. In the House, which has continued to do this, except for a couple of years under Speaker Pelosi, on the half a dozen big bills of the 12 spending bills we have now, they traditionally have 200 and 300 amendments on each of those bills, 200 and 300 different ideas as to how to spend the money. Some of those ideas are not to spend it at all, and what could be healthier than that? But the Senate is not allowed to do that. So we're asking again today, let's debate these bills. Let's, of course, debate the bill that defends the country. Let's debate the bill we're talking about here that takes care of those who do. Now, this bill includes $5.5 billion more money than was spent last year. I don't recall a huge hark and cry last year when this bill finally gets passed as part of one big, not very appealing package at the end, that we're not spending nearly enough on military construction or veterans programs. But suddenly $5.5 billion more than we spent last year isn't nearly enough to spend this year. Now, the committee thought it was enough. In fact, this bill was voted out of committee, and remember, this committee has Democrats and Republicans on it, 27-3. 11 Democrats and all of the Republicans said this is the best way to spend this amount of money, $5 billion more for these purposes than we spent last year. Let's vote that bill out so it can be debated on the Senate floor. And here, months later, we're still trying to get 60 senators to agree to have that debate. Really, we're trying to get, I think, 5 senators to agree to have that debate, because all of the Republicans and one Democrat appear to be willing to move forward on these defense funding bills, but not enough on the other side. So if we could get those, even if we get half of the Democrats that voted for the bill in committee, we'd have the votes we needed to have this debate and talk about spending money. But the alternative, we should all understand, is if we don't do it this way, eventually the government has to be funded, and it'll be funded in absolutely the worst possible way. One big bill, no debate, some desperate decision at the end of the year that we have to keep the government funded, because we do have to defend the country. I'm not arguing with the decision that ultimately has to be made to defend the country. I'm not arguing with the decision that ultimately has to be made to have the military installations that allow that to happen with military construction. I'm not arguing with the decision that has to be made for the Veterans Affairs part of our government, including veterans' health, mental and physical health, behavioral health, and other health, to be funded properly. But why aren't we doing that today? What would be wrong with debating this bill? If you're not on that committee, if you're not one of the 27 senators, so 27% of the Senate has already voted on this. Let's send it to the Senate floor. If you're not one of the 27 senators that voted for it, or one of the 3 that voted against it, bring your ideas to the floor. That's how this process is supposed to work. They may be better than what's in that bill, but you'll never find out if we're not allowed to debate it. And it's regrettable for veterans and their families. We see a Veterans Administration that's not doing what it ought to do. And, you know, we've gone in a year from where the president a year ago said that the VA was the best funded part of his government being a quote. Best funded part of his government was the Veterans Administration. Well, suddenly the Veterans Administration problems are not, there's just not enough money. There was enough money a year ago, the president thought, but apparently not enough money now. What there's not is enough commitment to veterans in the Veterans Administration. We could have that debate here too. We've moved a long way in the last year to giving veterans more choices, more options, more places to go to get their health care. That system is in its fledgling stages. It ought to be debated as we talk about how to spend money that would be spent on the Veterans Administration, but you can't debate it and vote on it if people aren't willing to have the vote that it takes to have that debate. So getting back to the way this process works transparently, the way it works constitutionally, is what we ought to be doing. Well, we need to have this vote today. We need to get to the defense appropriating bill. We had a vote earlier this week that I didn't support, but the vote was to move forward for a few more weeks with last year's spending. Last year's priorities only work for so long. When we had the situation just a couple of years ago where the Budget Control Act had to go into effect, and it went into effect because the Congress didn't do its job, appropriated more money than the law would allow, so then that required that line-by-line cutting. The sequester is not a necessary part of that law at all. It's only part of the law if the Congress violates the law. And the Congress violated the law, the president signed the bill, and then you go and do line-by-line cutting, and whenever we brought the leaders of our military in to talk about this, none of them were for line-by-line cutting. Who would be? That's the worst possible way to reduce spending, because you're not making any choices, you're just admitting you can't make any choices, so everything gets cut everywhere. But every one of them said, this is a problem, but an even bigger problem in almost every case. Admiral McRaven at Special Ops said a bigger problem than the sequester was the continuing resolution, because we were cutting lines of a budget that might have met the military needs 5 years before that, but it hadn't been updated for 5 years. Let's have this debate. Let's move beyond saying we can't decide how to spend the money to debating how to spend the money. Let's have a defense structure that works for 2015 and 16, not a defense structure that might have worked for 2010. One of the great frustrations that the people we work for have with us today is that they believe that this is not all that complicated, and they're right. How complicated could it be to get elected to the United States Senate to be willing to take positions and vote, and then just say, let's take positions and vote? That's what this debate would be about. This debate would be about moving forward on these critical issues. I hope our colleagues will join us today. I hope there are 60 senators who say, I'm ready to have this debate. I'm ready to defend the country. I'm ready to take care of those who do, their families, their veterans, their survivors. That's what this budget is all about. How you could walk onto the floor and say, I don't want to deal with that now, I want to just put that off a little while longer, is disappointing to me, and it's disappointing to lots of people. So let's get our work done, Madam President. And I would yield the floor.